just did a rant about how we have actually passed a major climate change tipping point that we can't walk back from. We can't stop it. This is coming now. It is unstoppable. This first step of it, which has to do with, the destruction of major cities in the United States and all around the world. You can check this out over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, or for people who support us on YouTube as well, you can see this. Get over to patreon.com/THOMHARTMANN to check this out. We're talking about how prior to a couple of years ago, and this is how, tipping points, you can only see them in the rearview mirror. Prior to a couple of years ago, in the winter, the Arctic and Greenland, the Antarctic and Greenland, would recover some of their ice. Now they're not even doing that. It's just pausing. The melting is just pausing. That's that tipping point. And the consequences of this are going to be terrible. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
For our book today, we're reading from Elon Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947, it became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city on the Mediterranean, the White City, as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine, in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its two upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting, as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmogrified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building on a cold Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the fourth and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous three schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This fourth and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was, in fact, the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948. Once the decision was taken, it took 6 months to complete the mission. When it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods had been emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on 10 March 1948, and above all its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of ethnic cleansing operation regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. After the Holocaust, it has become impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the disposition of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative element in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as an historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, and the people who perpetrate it today are considered criminals to be brought before special tribunals. It may be difficult to decide how one ought to refer to or deal with in the legal sphere.
Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Monday! Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. I'm back. Louise and I went to London for a couple of days. There's a conference, a VidCon conference on doing video. It's something that we do, right? We produce video. Our show, as well as being a radio show, is also a TV show, and it was, how to do that and how to do that on the internet and all that kind of stuff. And lots of fascinating workshops, and met a lot of cool people and new toys, and it was absolutely amazing. And we got to hang out with Nigel, who lives over there and runs much of our web stuff, and with Sue, who does our newsletter. So, and both of them old friends of mine, going all the way back to CompuServe days. We all ran CompuServe forums together back in the 1980s. So it was a real nice trip, and we're back. And special tip of the hat and many thanks to Jefferson Smith for filling in for me. He did a marvelous job from everything I'm hearing. And we had a great time, and I am a couple 100,000 frequent flyer miles poorer, but it was definitely worth the trip. So anyway, the question that I wanted to lay out in this first hour, in the second hour, we're going to have this guy from We Build the Wall Incorporated on. We're going to debate the wall and all that kind of stuff. And in our third hour, I want to get into some of the topics that, frankly, go beyond that. The lessons of Youngstown Steel and all that sort of thing. But the first one is the crises that we're facing. There's and my question to you is, of all the crises that we are facing right now in the United States, Trump, of course, is asserting that brown people coming from Mexico with drugs and gang tattoos, at least in his mind, right? In his delusional, paranoid mind, that's our biggest crisis, right? That's worth a national emergency. Well, if you're going to have a national emergency, what are the real crises? And I think that this is an important question, because if Trump gets away with his emergency declaration, and Congress, and he kind of laid this out, as did Alec Baldwin, and Congress says, no, it's not really an emergency, sorry.
And then he vetoes that congressional resolution, which undoes his declaration of emergency. And then Congress fails to overturn his veto. That means that he gets his emergency. And then he can move a few $1 billion around and he can, build some more of his wall or whatever he wants to do. But the question is, what are the real crises that we're facing? I mean, if Trump is going to blow up the Constitution, if he's going to violate Article 1, Section 9, if he's going to say, no, I am like King George III, I am the one who decides how money gets spent, and I'm the one who takes his tax money and spends it however I want. If he does that successfully, and McConnell and the other Republicans kind of go along with him, and yeah, okay, all right, no problem, then. And a Democratic president comes in behind him and says, this is all well and good, but we actually have some real emergencies here. I mean, the IPCC says that we now have, 11 years, 10 years to basically go to zero carbon, or we're going to see the destruction of much of what we call civilization and possibly even the destruction of the human race. We have, schools that are failing. We have, in large part because of the whole racist history of funding schools with property taxes. We have more than 500,000 American children suffering from lead poisoning. There was an interesting piece in the New York Times, actually, back a week or so ago, that listed some of the things that could be done with the $5 billion that Donald Trump wants for his wall. And I'll just go through this list and as possibilities. But what I'd like to hear from you at 202-808-9925 is, what do you think are the real emergencies that we're facing? I mean, if we're gonna declare an emergency, or if a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, a Democratic president comes along and has a Democratic Congress, and I think that that's entirely possible, by the way. Which of these crises would you like to see us, would you like to see a Democratic president basically lay his presidency or her presidency on the line to do something about it? And how do we fight back when we are being overwhelmed by the GOP power structure and when the majority of Americans are one paycheck away from, having a crisis themselves? So some of the things we could do with the $5 billion that Trump is going to take from someplace. We don't know yet, probably out of the military budget. There was some discussion earlier that he was going to take, emergency funds for California and Puerto Rico, and not Texas. No. Texas is a red state, but California, Puerto Rico. But we just don't know yet, right? And we'll find that out as the week goes on. But for example, more than 500,000 American children suffer from lead poisoning every year. This is an epidemic of lost potential. Lead poisoning measurably reduces IQ and increases the propensity for violence. To solve that problem nationwide, to literally have contractors, whether they're government agencies or people that we hire using government money, to have contractors go through and get all the lead paint out of American homes and get the lead water lines out. $125 million. Save the lives of 500,000 children. Trump doesn't consider that important at all, so that ain't happening. For $438 million, we could put over 1 million long-acting reversible contraceptives. They're called LARCs, IUDs, implants, things like that, for at-risk young women. And that's based on the cost of $438 per person. That's $438 million. We can provide comprehensive drug treatment for 40,000 mothers for 18 months. We've got roughly, the best guess is right now that with children under 2 years old, there's about 40,000 mothers who are actually addicted to drugs right now. And at the cost of $28,000 each for 18 months for drug treatment, we could spend $1 billion and solve that problem. We could save 40,000 children's lives. We could for $650 million, We could send visiting home nurses to 100,000 pregnant moms and their newborn children, shortly after they give birth, and help them out. For $311 million, this is chump change compared to the $5 billion that Trump wants. We could give methadone treatment to 47,000 narcotics addicts in the United States. For $4.5 billion, we could provide Medicaid to 3.78 million children. We could give them health care. Almost 4 million children. For $73 million, we could give VA health care to 7,000 returning troops. For $250 million, we could radically reduce gang violence in the United States. For $11 million, we could buy back 118,000 guns. For $200 million, we could provide permanent housing for 200,000 homeless people. For $720 million, we could provide an employment program for adults in public housing. 90,000 people in public housing who, in many cases, are functionally illiterate. $720 million, we could give them, an education. For $258 million, we could provide literacy programs for 5 million at-risk children. That's $20 per child per year, literacy coaching. And there's even a program to do it. It's called Reaching Out and Read. For $650 million, we could provide technical education and internships for 50,000 low-income young people. Give them a start. Launch them into careers in their lives. For $234 million, see, none of these are even $1 billion. And Trump is saying, I'm going to get $8 billion. For $234 million, job training and life skill coaching for 36,000 prisoners. So when they, are integrated back into their societies, we don't have high recidivism rates. This is something that every European country does this. We don't. We could enroll struggling 10th grade boys. This is a particular at-risk group. For $322 million for 11% of all our 10th grade boys, which is, about the percentage who are, in all probability, going to get out of high school or maybe not even graduate from high school and end up, with a life that just doesn't work because they really didn't have that education that they needed. For $100 million, we could fund research into crime, drug use, and high school graduation rates and poverty. We could, the Treasury Department estimates that for every dollar that they spend funding the Internal Revenue Service, they get back $6 in taxes. And the Republicans, ever since Reagan, have been defunding the IRS year after year after year. It's down to the point now where it's very rare that the IRS even audits billionaires anymore. They mostly just audit average working people because, it's easier and faster and they can keep their audit numbers up. $250 million, we could fund the IRS. For $481 million, we could give a 6% raise to 200,000 teachers. That would be all the teachers in Florida, Louisiana, and Texas, for example. 6% raise. We could provide financial coaching to 5.9 million struggling Americans for a little over $1 billion. We could train 542,000, quote, working poor Americans for only $43 million. We could buy bed nets to protect 20 million families from malaria. Now, that would be mostly in other countries, but it would save 20,000 lives. I mean, the list goes on. We could provide vitamin A supplementation for 100 million children and prevent blindness all over the world for $270 million. We could purify water for 25 million people for $33 million. I mean, where should our priorities be if we're going to have an emergency? And if Trump is successful in establishing this precedent, what should a Democratic president do if they're going to declare an emergency?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, there's that. There's a lot of other stuff in the news. We'll get to that. We'll get to your calls here in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Stephen in Makawaho, Hawaii. I'm sure I'm mangling that, Stephen. My apologies. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. How do you say your town?
It's Makawa, but actually I live in Kula. I get my mail in Makawa. But anyways, welcome
okay.
back.
Thank you.
All those things you mentioned, I'm for them. We got to do them all. But unless we combat climate change, life is not going to be worth living, or we're not going to be here. So I think the next Democratic president needs to, one, outlaw animal agriculture, because animal agriculture causes more climate change than all forms of transportation, and it's the most important thing we need to do, also for our health and for the animals. So that's my priority.
Yeah. Instead of absolutely outlawing animal agriculture, I get what you're saying. I don't know if you're familiar with Alan Savory and his whole thing about hoofed animals and fields and things, that there are certain types of animal agriculture that actually store carbon, right? And basically it's herding and shepherding people. But I'm totally with you on outlawing factory farms and these 10,000 hog operations and things like that. And spending money to educate people about plant-based alternatives to meat. And finally, I'd say, Stephen, one of the best ways to change behavior is not so much to outlaw things, but to tax them. The production of meat, the selling of meat, the serving of meat, meat, by meat I mean generically, pretty much everything, probably even fish, because now we're to the point where we're farming fish and it's disrupting our oceans and things. So let's say flesh foods. If there was a tax on those things, a tax at the point of manufacture, a tax at the point of processing, a tax at the point of sale, that would encourage people to eat a more plant-based diet. What do you think?
Yeah, I think those are all good things. It just in terms of if we're going to have to declare a national emergency, then I would say, yeah, we have to go for the outlawing. As far as Alan Savory, his theories have all been proven wrong. If you read Dr. Oppenlander's book, all of Alan Savory's people on his board are all people involved in animal agriculture in the biggest way. And
I knew that his claims were overblown. He was saying this will solve everything. I thought that there was actually some small benefit that could be derived from letting the buffalo roam across the Midwest again, that kind of thing. But apparently that's wrong too.
Yeah, it is. And I hope someday you could get Oppenlander in, or the people who put out the movie Cowspiracy. Yeah, Savory's stuff is just wrong.
Yeah,
but
it's funny how that just like took the world by storm there for 6 months or so back. What, 3-4 years ago was it?
Yeah, when he had his TED Talk. But
yeah. Yeah, but that's not the thing. So yeah, I'm with you, Stephen. I'm absolutely with you. And I guess one of the good news things, one of the things that I heard at this conference in London, they were talking about, what are the hottest trends right now on YouTube and things like that. One of the hottest trends right now is, how do I become a vegan?
Absolutely. And you were in England. England is incredibly one of the most vegan places it's turned out to be in all of the world.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. My friend Nigel was, or maybe it was Sue, was telling me, I think the town is Bristol, but I could be wrong. But there's some town in the UK that's like vegan central. There's like a dozen vegan restaurants. I was like, that's just like Portland. We've got a whole bunch of vegan restaurants here. Stephen, thank you for the call. Spot on. That's a great one. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour and change. One of the really great ways that you can support our program, specifically just the Thom Hartmann program here, and all the work that we're doing, is by going to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, all run together, and signing up. Become a supporter of our program. And we have special content that's only available to our Patreon supporters, including a rant that we just put up about this amazing thing that I just learned. I learned this from Professor Barack Orbach of the University of Arizona Medical School, or Law School, that Robert Bork's bizarre idea that it doesn't matter how big companies get, it doesn't matter how destructive they are of competition, it doesn't matter how they wipe out local communities, all that matters is that consumers have low prices, led to directly The Walmartization of America. It was adopted by the Supreme Court in '77, by Reagan in '82, and it's still the law. Check it out. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We're talking about what are the real crises. You know, Donald Trump has essentially said, well, you know, I could have done this anytime. And it's, you know, as I said, we're going to get into that in the next hour of the program. You know, this whole debate around the wall and all this kind of stuff. But if he is successful, and if he sets it up so that, you know, when President Elizabeth Warren or President Cory Booker or President, you know, fill in the blank comes in and says, okay, we've got a crisis. What is the crisis that is actually bigger than the need for, I don't think there's any need for a wall at all. That, as I said, we'll be debating that in the next hour. But what in your mind is the biggest crisis? Renee in St. Louis. Hey, Renee, what's on your mind today? And thanks for watching us on YouTube, Renee.
Oh, great. Okay, so if we're going to spend money and we're going to spend $5 billion, can we start with paying black people their reparations?
For 400 years worth of free labor? Yes.
For 400 years and continuing on, because it doesn't look like they plan on stopping.
Yeah. Well, and they're continuing it in our prisons.
In the prison system, pay black people reparations. Clearly, this man has never had to run a household of any sort, because you take care of your light, your gas, your phone, your bills, and your household bills first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Then if I have extra money going over, I can't even afford to go to the movies. That's just a $10 ticket for one person.
Yeah. So Renee, how would reparations work in your mind? How do you do it? Where do you begin?
Okay. So with the tax, one of the things that I would do is I would give all black people health care. Let's start there.
Okay. Well, let's give everybody health care. I mean, that
exactly. Yeah. Let's give everybody health care. There are just so many other things that can be done with this money. They knew that the man was corrupt before they put him in. And everybody was all excited about his book that he wrote and putting himself on television with that foolish program that he had. Mm. He's a foolish man. Okay, and do not trust Mike Pence. Do not trust him.
Yeah, there you go. I'm totally with you. Renee, thank you very much for the call.
I'll let you go and talk to everybody else.
There you go. Reparations. That's a great place to start. We'll be back. What are the real crises that you see that would be worthy of a presidential proclamation? 27 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. And how do we take back power from the great money that's running the GOP?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I mean, the Supreme Court really screwed this one up, and now we've got even our elections are being defined by who's got the most money, which billionaire is behind whom. Club book today is Last Boat Out of Shanghai by Helen Zia, the subtitle, The Epic Story of the Chinese Who Fled Mao's Revolution. This is from the prologue, Shanghai, May 4th, 1949. Bing sat up straight in the pedicab, gripping the hard seat as the driver cursed and spat. She watched with alarm as his feet, clad in sandals cut from old tires, seemed to slow to a snail's pace just when she most needed speed. This stylish-looking young woman had imagined that her last hours in Shanghai would be spent waving farewell from a ship's deck to envious onlookers below as a river breeze gently lifted her dark hair, just as she'd seen in the movies. After all, she was about to leave China's biggest, most glamorous, and most notorious city. But now, with the imminent threat of a violent communist revolution, she was running away again, along with half the city's population, it seemed.
And instead of standing at the rail exchanging smiles with the ship's other passengers, she was stuck in traffic, terrified that she wouldn't reach the Shanghai Hongqiao wharf in time. That would spell disaster. She lurched forward as the pedicab driver stood on the pedals of his three-wheeled cycle and came to a stop. Around her was a sea of other pedicabs, rickshaws, cars, buses, carts, and trucks, all screeching and honking, their drivers yelling every manner of obscenity. The cacophony reverberated against the walls of the stone and concrete canyon of Nanjing Road. Bing was no stranger to Shanghai's mayhem, but she'd never seen anything quite like this. Of all times to be stuck in such bedlam, on the very day she had to get to the riverfront, the date set for her departure from this desperate city. She'd sewn her floral print quipois for this special occasion. Each careful stitch had captured her growing anticipation. With her oval face, big eyes, and full red lips, all crowned by a tiara of black permanent waves, the 20-year-old might have been mistaken for a coy Shanghai poster girl, but for the panic in her eyes. Like her, everyone in Shanghai seemed to be in a frenzy to escape, to use any means to get away from the impending arrival of the communists. But unlike those who were still clamoring for a seat to anywhere, Bing was one of the lucky ones. She possessed a precious one-way ticket out on a ship to America. Finally, the driver managed to break through the crush. He harangued everyone in his path, shouting, "Move along, you worthless mule scrotum, smellier than pig farts." She didn't blink at his choice of words, which came as naturally as breathing on Shanghai's streets. She didn't care as long as she got to the wharf. The ship's smokestacks came into view just past the stately Astor House Hotel and the towering 19-story Broadway Mansion's apartments, where the Xinjiao Creek meets the bend in the Huangpu River, the last major tributary of the mighty Yangtze River before it joins the East China Sea. Massive granite buildings, all in European style, lined the signature waterfront boulevard and docks. To the foreigners, this prime section of waterfront was known as the Bund, from a Hindustani word meaning embankment. The Chinese called it Waitan, meaning outside or foreign shore, a reference to the foreigners who once ruled this proud imperialist showcase of Shanghai. British and American businessmen had wrested away the best sections of the port city with the full support of the government. Land and sovereignty had once been ripped from China, spoils of the opium wars that had forced the narcotic onto China 100 years before. Everything about these monuments to international capitalists and pale big noses seemed foreign, including the British Big Ben chime of the giant clock tower over the customs house. Soon it would be up to the communists to decide what would follow, what would happen to these grand stone edifices. Shanghai was China's most modern, populous, and cosmopolitan city. One of the leading metropolises of the world, the Paris of the Orient was also home to tens of thousands of foreigners who were despised by as imperialists by the Communist Party and its leader, Mao Zedong. The city was the launching point for major inland routes and international traffic, whether by boat, plane, train, or wooden cart, making it the epicenter for the massive exodus in the late 1940s. Stoked by the anticipated communist victory over the nationalist government headed by Chiang Kai-shek, panic and terror had first infected the wealthiest, most educated, and most privileged classes and sent them running in what they fully expected to be a brief exile. It was assumed that the communists would target the rich and the pampered in the same way that the Bolsheviks had gone after the Tsarist White Russians, many of whom had come to Shanghai as refugees from that 1917 revolution. No one knows precisely how many people fled Shanghai during the early years of the Communist Revolution. Scholars and journalists have estimated that more than 1 million people set off from or through that port city. Many of those who ran for the exits belonged to the city's capitalist and middle classes, who presumably had the most to lose under the communists. These two groups comprised about 5% and 20%, respectively, of the city's 6 million residents, or about 1.5 million people. On the other hand, the remaining 4.5 million who made up Shanghai's majority saw no need to escape. They included Shanghai's industrial workers, coolies, drivers, the destitute. But it was not only members of the upper classes who fled. They were joined by old regime loyalists, from high nationalist government officials to lowly foot soldiers, as well as those who simply got caught up in the frenzy or were especially fearful. Unfortunately, there are no records of the exodus, since the retreating nationalists destroyed as many documents as they could, while the incoming communists inherited a country in such disarray that no accounting of the departures is known to have taken place. Last Boat Out of Shanghai by Helen Zia.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So Sue tells Sean, who tells me that it's Brighton, not Bristol, and in the UK. And, we've got to get there one of these days. It sounds like sort of, San Francisco in the UK or something. It sounds like a great place. But anyhow, it was so nice to see Sue, and it was so nice to see Nigel. And Louise and I had just a wonderful time. Anyway, back to the crises that we're facing. Steve in Park Ridge, Illinois. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Always good to talk to you. Climate change is the elephant not in the room, but in the solar system as it regards planet Earth. But the last time we spoke, I was on my way to a rally, and I'm on my way to a rally today. I'm in Chicago, and it's there's a national protest against Trump and the national emergencies all over the country. I think there's 250 cities that are participating, including Chicago, Federal Plaza. Shout out to them. And
at what time?
It's at noon.
Okay.
It's now 11:30. But it's so fascinating. The real emergency, short term, is sitting in the White House. And anybody that doesn't understand what he potentially could do, I mean, he's already done 2 years of damage. But we're on the cusp of becoming a fascist state. I don't want to, over-dramatize, but he's an authoritative wannabe, and the GOP are like the Nazi party for Hitler in terms of support. They're not, counterbalancing his motives, et cetera, but rather they're either supporting or they're complicit by their silence.
Yeah, I absolutely get it. With regard to climate change, we don't even need to spend money. We need to stop spending money. We are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry to the tune in the United States of about $300 billion a year. And worldwide, it's several $1 trillion a year. And if we simply stopped giving them all that money as a starting point, and then secondly, put into place a tax and rebate program where, say there's, a $10, $20, $30 a ton tax on carbon, and then 100% of that money gets rebated to every American. Every American gets some of that money back, through use the IRS to do this. I mean, this is not my unique idea. This has been around for quite some time. And that would not require any spending at all. I mean, it's crazy. We just need to stop shoveling money at fossil fuel billionaires. Steve, have a great time at the... Go ahead.
The other thing that's crazy, that list that you read from the New York Times article, I mean, it just puts a pit in your stomach of all of the problems that this country faces that could be solved if there was the will. We certainly have the smarts, so we have the way, but there are forces of, obstruction, whatever, that stand in the way of getting things accomplished that really matter.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a crying shame.
Yeah, I'm with you, Steve. Thank you, and have a great time at the rally, and if anything of consequence happens, give us a shout back and let us know. Okay.
Will do.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to WCPT. Ed in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Just wanted to share that this whole emergency thing is really Congress's fault for giving away the farm with the law that lets the executive have their power. And the fault in the law is that they allow in the law that you have to have a veto-proof margin in Congress to say, no, don't do that.
Right.
And so once this is all over, that law needs to be tweaked. And sadly, the Supreme Court is going to easily uphold Trump's actions because right now, with current law, what he's doing, as long as Congress doesn't override it, it's in compliance with the law. The Constitution is being violated by Congress, not by the president. And so the only person who can save us right now is Mitch McConnell.
Yikes. Then we're screwed.
But the question really is, how much does he love the institution that he served, whether we agree with his policies or not?
Yeah.
How much does he love the institutions and the traditions?
I think if Mitch McConnell had any
life on?
respect for the institution of the Senate, or for the Constitution for that matter, he wouldn't have blocked Donald Trump from having, Barack Obama. In the last 2 years of Obama's presidency, he got 2 federal judges. Last Thursday, Mitch McConnell pushed 44 federal judges through. I mean, Merrick Garland, it wouldn't even hold hearings. Mitch McConnell is.
We can hope.
Mitch McConnell is a. The words that come to mind are not things that would be appropriate to say on the air, but his clear commitment is not to the Constitution and is not to the United States of America. Mitch McConnell and much of the power structure of the Republican Party, their clear commitment, their number one commitment is to money and power. And right now in the United States, the wealthiest industry is the fossil fuel industry. That's where that money is going. That's where that money is coming from. That's who they're carrying water for. It's why the one thing that the entire Republican Party is united on is it's not Medicare. It's not, it's not any of the things that you would think, have policy consequences. It's denying climate change. I mean, because their money is coming from fossil fuel billionaires. So, yeah, and we'll see what the court does. Actually, I think the question is going to be, is John Roberts more committed to the Constitution than he is to the Republican Party? Because he has certainly, look at gutting the Voting Rights Act, for example. That was such a naked power play on behalf of the Republicans by John Roberts, saying, oh, well, there's no more discrimination in the United States. No political party is going to mess with the, our electoral system, so just for their own benefit. We don't need that anymore. Clear lie. And, is that John Roberts going to be the John Roberts who shows up? I have a horrible feeling that it will be. Denny in Pine Top, Arizona. Hey, Denny, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine. Thanks for watching this on YouTube. What's up?
Real quick. I'm an ex-City of Flint cop. I have a military background, Vietnam era, combat zone, infantry paratrooper, factory work summers at Buick Manufacturing, to Ford College to return each semester before I was drafted. Then my dad and grandfather, both tool and die makers, General Motors. We have a similar background.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Finally, thank you for the big number picture of the real emergencies in this country. And there could be and should be a solution, and it starts with jobs at a livable wage. And I believe the Green New Deal could jumpstart that paradigm.
I absolutely agree. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave.
If there are trillions of dollars, I'll say off-grid, that is uninvested at this time, as we're told, I believe there's a substantial chunk of wealth that could collateralize a loan with enough money to restart a green jobs program. It will be incremental in the beginning, of course. And I think there could be a government-sponsored initiative at a reasonable interest rate, say 7 to 10%, to borrow the amount of money that would be necessary to restart the economy with a green jobs program. And again, these jobs, I agree with you, will evolve into livable pay with the use of unionizing, et cetera, right. And it's bound to happen.
So let's bring back the unions. And Denny, your point is a really important one, and let me put a little larger frame around it. We have in the United States, we've got a gun crisis. 40,000 shootings last year, 40,000 gun deaths. That's massive. Hundreds of thousands of gun injuries. To a certain extent, some of that, a lot of that, maybe even, particularly the suicides, which is about half of all those gun deaths, have to do with economic crises. So you've got that, number one. Number two, you've got economic crisis. Basically, the destruction of the middle class as a consequence of 40 years of Reaganism has has, it causes divorces. It causes suicides. It has created a generation that will not do better than their parents for the first time probably in the history of the United States, outside of maybe the generation that lived through the Great Depression, and they eventually recovered as well. The impact, the consequence, the terrible, terrible impact of the transfer of literally trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars of wealth from not just income but wealth, actual, the what people own, from middle class Americans, from working class Americans, and people like you, Denny, people like my dad, people like me for that matter. I mean, I take a paycheck. I've got a job here. That enormous transfer of wealth from working people to people who, by and large, made their, as Robert Reich points out, either inherited their money, which is about half of the very, very rich people in this country, like the Walton family, or who made their money as a result of being big in a monopoly that should not exist, or who had inside information or committed fraud. Basically, those are the only three ways you get to be a billionaire, and that has had a horrible impact in the United States, and it's also created a political atmosphere where, as Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson pointed out in their new book, it's not the spirit level, the inner level is their newest book. Thank you, Sean. That it's destroying trust. It's increasing, the ills that I already mentioned. It's increasing teenage pregnancy rates. It's increasing STDs. The fact that we don't have a national health care system puts us all at risk if there was to be another flu pandemic, or if we were to be attacked, biologically with a biological weapon of some kind. We don't even have a national system to deal with that. So jobs and affordable wages, the topic that you just brought up, Denny, is so much bigger than it sounds. Because what we're talking about is putting America and putting the middle class of America back together. Reaganism has just ripped us apart. And so spot on. Denny, thanks so much for the call, and thanks so much for watching us. We'll be right back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We know that there's not a real crisis on our southern border. In fact, more people in the last decade have left this country than come in through the border. But what are the real crises? And welcome back. Dad in Portland, not my dad, but your name is Dad, listening on X-Ray FM in Portland, Oregon?
Well, actually, I go by Dad on KXRY in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, great. Okay, cool.
As in News With.
There you go. So what's up?
Topsoil. Some figures.
Uh-huh.
We're losing topsoil worldwide anywhere from 1/16th to 1/20th of an inch a year. That means about every 16 to 20 years we lose an inch. Mother Nature, by herself, depending on the latitude and local conditions, creates an inch of topsoil every 200 to 300 years, with the maximum help of humans by composting and fertilization, best case 50 to 70 years to create an inch of topsoil. Now, my best subject in school was not math, but I can take the best case for loss is 20 years an inch, and the best case for gain is 50 years an inch, and the worst case is vastly worse on both kinds. And the fact that we cannot feed the population we have right now, if we don't have topsoil, my descendants are going to starve. And that's a crisis that really, really, really needs attention.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in fact, I read about this in Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. At the time that European colonists first, or whatever you want to call them, first started moving across the Midwest, there were large chunks of the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, Kentucky, where the average topsoil depth was 7 to 10 feet. And it's now less than 1 foot. And that topsoil sequestered an enormous amount of carbon. And the amazing story that we saw last week, I did it as a geeky science alert, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, but in the last couple of weeks, they just came out with this. Everybody had been wondering, the climate deniers have been saying, well, there was this little ice age in the 1600s where the whole world cooled down for about 80 years, and nobody knows why, but it had to do probably with sunspots or something, and therefore global warming has nothing to do with carbon cycles. Well, it turns out that the reason why we had the little ice age, the reason why the atmosphere, the entire planet cooled down by about 0.5 degree for about 80 years, was because we killed 100 million Native Americans, and many of them, most of them in fact, were engaged in some form of agriculture. And when they died, their fields went fallow. Those fallow fields grew up into bushes and trees and things, which were sequestering carbon, sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, and building soil again. And by sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, because trees are made out of carbon dioxide, right? It's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. It makes cellulose. That's why it's called carbohydrates. That it sucked enough CO2 out of the atmosphere that it actually reduced the greenhouse effect of CO2 to the point that it cooled the planet down. Our genocide of Native Americans cooled down the planet. And so if we want to reverse climate change, the topic that you're talking about, Dat, is a big piece of that. And that is, let's restore our topsoil.
And you put the fact that within the next generation, you're going to have 10 billion people on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
We're having trouble feeding them now.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to get there. I just don't. I think we've already exceeded the carrying capacity of the planet. Without fossil fuels, I think the carrying capacity of this planet is probably in the neighborhood of 1 billion people. With fossil fuels, it's probably around 6 or 7 billion. And, and we've got to phase out the fossil fuels. But that's a whole nother conversation. But topsoil, big one. Thank you, Dad. And welcome back, Russell in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Russell.
Hey,
thanks.
Tom. Welcome back.
Thank you.
My idea is, of course, climate change. The bug population is being reduced, the animal population is being reduced, even the microbiome in our stomach. They're actually done studies where it's being reduced.
Yep.
But that having been said, I think there's something more insidious going on here. I believe that, the fossil fuel billionaires and Trump and maybe, his cohorts, they know that this is happening. They know this is coming. And their whole idea is we have to deny it to not upset anybody, the populace in general.
Right.
And then we have to clamp. We need to, gain control in any way we can. And then something like this emergency declaration, he's getting money, and he has the ability to get money to do a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily have to mean building a wall. It could be, we need to clamp down on the people, on the plant, in the country, you name it.
Deregulate more things, make the air more poisonous, make the water more poisonous, which makes industry more profitable. Things like that.
They're going to be fine. They'll have their gated communities, probably gated counties.
So it's like a smash and grab, Russell.
Fine.
What's going on? It's like a smash and grab. They're just they know that it's all going down. They're grabbing they're breaking the windows and grabbing everything they can, and they don't care about the records they leave behind because, hey, I got mine, right?
Exactly. And we have to understand that when this happens, and I've been following climate change for a long time, doing a lot of research. It's a lot worse than most people think. They try to keep the whole idea as well. It's a problem, but there's something we can do about it. Well, it's a real big problem, and we're not sure that there's something we can do about it. We're hoping there is.
Yeah.
And if we have those people in control of how this shakes out, it's going to be, the best is going to happen to them. It's not going to be a good thing for the rest of the people.
I'm with you. Guy McPherson is probably the most articulate spokesman for the absolute doomsday scenario, and I can't, I can't just dismiss him or the many people who are along with him. For great information on this, go to arctic-news.blogspot.com. But yeah,
Right.
spot on. Russell, thank you for the call. Monica in Raleigh, North Carolina, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Monica, what's up?
Okay, I wanted to inform everybody that I just found out that in North Carolina there are hundreds of districts that have gone. They have not been formed. The precincts have not been formed. And this is because people simply are not Democrats at least, are not taking part in the process this time around. And one of those, I was very shocked to learn that one of those districts was Charlotte, North Carolina, which has been so...
Now, by not being formed, do you mean that the local party is not active?
The local districts.
The local Democratic Party or the entire political apparatus?
The entire apparatus.
Wow.
People are not... it takes only 5 people to make a quorum. That's all you need to get your district organized. Mm-hmm. At least around here it is. I don't know what it is in other states, but
sure.
The thing of it is that these people, we need to... What I would hope everybody does all across the nation, whether you're Democrat, whether you're Green, the problem of independence is that they can't take part in who chooses the politicians that run. But
well, they can in open primary states. But so it sounds to me, Monica, like essentially, to boil down what you're saying, that you see our biggest crisis is a crisis of democracy, and everything else flows out of that.
People are not taking part. And, all they need to do is go to their Democratic Party or go, if they're more in line with Green Party, go with the Green Party and find out if their precinct has been organized.
Yeah.
And if it has not been organized, then they should step up and say, I want to organize it.
Yeah. Well, Louise and I were in an airport yesterday, as I mentioned, and I don't remember which paper it was. But it was a paper that we picked up in the airport, and might have been the Times or the Financial Times or something. And there was an article in there about which states have more than, I believe it was more than 50% of the people in the state could pass the citizenship test that you have to pass in order to become a naturalized citizen in the United States. And the only state that was over that threshold, and my recollection is it was 50%, was Vermont. That was the only state. Apparently they've got really good schools there. But yeah, we have a crisis in democracy. Monica, thank you. That's a great one. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think the truth of our system has been so twisted by neoliberalism that we can no longer really actually answer any of the questions facing us, the existential threats, because it just doesn't get through. You talk about it. Your listeners talk very eloquently about it. People write books about it. But where is it all leading to? Unless we fix that, I don't really see that our government is really going to, which is very necessary. Government is necessary. We need to govern ourselves both politically and culturally. We need it. This is what human beings do, and we need to have a good one. I'm not cynical. I think there's a lot of things going on in politics that are very, very hopeful, but this is a crisis that's going on right now, right before our eyes, and we need to really put our heads together and do something about it.
I agree. I absolutely agree, John. And there's quite a bit of the crisis is actually in the White House right now and in the GOP. John, thank you for the call. And thanks for listening to us there in Minneapolis. We'll be back. We're going to debate the wall right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly, they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle
to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
One of the really great ways that you can support our program, specifically just the Thom Hartmann program here, and all the work that we're doing, is by going to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, all run together, and signing up. Become a supporter of our program. And we have special content that's only available to our Patreon supporters, including a rant that we just put up about this amazing thing that I just learned. I learned this from Professor Barack Orbach of the University of Arizona Medical School, or Law School, that Robert Bork's bizarre idea that it doesn't matter how big companies get, it doesn't matter how destructive they are of competition, it doesn't matter how they wipe out local communities, all that matters is that consumers have low prices, led to directly the Walmartization of America. It was adopted by the Supreme Court in '77, by Reagan in '82, and it's still the law. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us is Brian. Is it Kolfage, Brian?
Kolfage.
Kolfage. Thank you very much. My apologies for not having checked that before we went on the air.
Everyone butchers it. It's okay.
That's all right. You are the president and founder of We Build the Wall, Inc. WeBuildTheWall.us is the website. Your Twitter handle is Brian Kolfage, Kolfage. And I don't get this. Why? First of all, as I'm sure you know, prior to the 1980s, really, for all practical purposes, there was no, quote, crisis on our southern border. I mean, people would come north for the picking season, then they'd go south after the picking season and go back living in Mexico and things like that. Eisenhower in the 50s did his Bracero program, where kind of give them almost a green card. It's good for the picking season, but only for that. That turned out to be being exploited by some employers who were threatening to take the right to work away from people. And so that ended in the early 60s. But up until really 1986, we didn't have any sort of a, quote, crisis on our southern border. And the reason why was because we had laws on the books that put wealthy white employers in jail when they hired people who were here without documentation. We got about 60% of the people who are here without documentation who came in through airports and things and overstayed their visas. About 40% who came through the southern border. Only a fraction of them actually crossed, someplace other than like El Paso or Tijuana. And what I don't understand is why you and Trump and all these other guys are so flipped out about we need to have a wall, when if you simply put people like Donald Trump himself, who just they just went in and found 18 people working at his Bedminster Golf Club for the last 15 years, none of whom had documentation. His company provided them with phony documentation. Why, if he went to jail, or somebody like him, somebody in his position, or somebody who's running the Bedminster Golf Course went to jail, if there was no more employment available, there's not a state in the union now that allows people who are here without documentation to have full access to welfare benefits and things. we would be back to where we were before Reagan stopped enforcing that law in 1986. I mean, Reagan stopped enforcing that law specifically to break the unions in the meatpacking and the construction industries, and it worked. I mean, that was his avowed goal. And no president since then has started enforcing that law because they're all afraid of apparently the power of wealthy white employers. I don't get why you want to do the least effective. I mean, if somebody wants to come into this country and work illegally, and you build your wall, and you mount gun turrets every 50 feet, and you put thousands of troops on it, like the old East Berlin Wall, where I used to live just a few hundred yards from, you're still not going to stop people from coming in. 1 million people a day coming into the United States legally on a visa, and then just overstaying their visa. What am I missing here?
I think you're right on some degree, and I agree with that. My personal beliefs are we need accountability on all levels. On all levels, we need to start holding people accountable. However, a good security plan is not just, it's dynamic. It's just not one thing. We need a wall. We need some sort of barrier. We need a fence.
But why do we need the wall?
We need the wall to stop people to come. We cannot control
But why are
them.
people coming in here?
They're coming because this is the land of opportunity.
It's only the land of opportunity if somebody will give them a job. If you won't give somebody a job, it's no longer the land of opportunity.
But in a perfect world, you can stop. You can do that, but it's never.
It's not a perfect world. It worked right up until 1986 when Ronald Reagan said, "I'm going to break the unions."
It's not in a perfect world, and it's not controlable in this environment.
Of course, it's controllable.
We have
Every paycheck has a Social Security number associated with it. The government in 1 week could figure out every single person in this country who's working illegally, and they could start putting people like Donald Trump running all of, Bedminster is just the most recent we found out about. He's had illegal, quote, illegal people working down in Mar-a-Lago for years. He is like one of the biggest illegal employers we've got. He's the reason why people are coming in this country.
So how do you stop the drugs, and how do you stop the cartels? How do you stop all the corruption? I mean, there's been sheriffs on the border arrested for corruption, for taking money. There's been mayors arrested for taking money from cartels. How do you stop that? That's the problem. Mexico has a cancer. Mexico's our neighbor. Their cancer is invading our country. Their cancer is rooting into our neighborhoods in the Midwest, all throughout our country, Kentucky.
Brian, I hate to break it to you, but the vast majority of drugs, virtually all of the fentanyl that's coming into the United States, is coming from China through the U.S. mail. Number one, which is, in my opinion, one of the ways that China's trying to destroy the United States. And most of the heroin and other drugs like that are coming from south of the border are coming in 18-wheel semis buried deep inside a shipment of Pottery Barn stuff. I mean, virtually according to our own government, over 90% of the drugs coming into the United States come through ports of entry. And as I said earlier, the majority of people who come here and overstay their visas come in on airplanes.
You know what? If people coming into our country overstaying visas, we know who they are. People coming across that border unchecked, we don't know who they are. It only took 19 people to pull off 9/11.
And every single one of them came into the United States legally on a visa.
But that's my point. Anyone can come across the border.
So how is a wall going to stop 9/11?
A wall? We can have it. No, it's impossible to stop another terror attack. But we can put steps into place to mitigate that, to minimize the risk, and that's what a wall does.
But over the last, we are at the lowest levels of illegal immigration that we've had since 1971, and over the last 10 years, and in large part because of the recession. But frankly, I think if we simply enforced our employer laws, we'd have the same thing. Over the last 10 years, you've had more people leaving the United States than coming to the United States. There's two categories here, Brian. You've got number one, you've got people who are trying to get into the United States legally or illegally, overstaying their visas or sneaking across the desert because they want a job and they want a better life. You solve that by undoing Reagan's "let's destroy the unions" thing and start putting wealthy employers like Donald Trump in prison.
But not everyone's coming here for a job.
Number two, well, that's the second. The second category of people are people who are coming for asylum. They're coming because they've got drugs and crime and gangs and god-awful, horrific, governments in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and all of those. I mean, that mess down there is largely the consequence of Ronald Reagan's policies in the 80s of disrupting democratically elected governments because, God forbid, they wanted to be socialist. As soon as they started talking about having national health care systems and free education, I mean, the only country that he didn't damage is Costa Rica, and they have, by the way, free education all the way up through MD, and they have a national health care system. They have better lifespan and better life outcomes than we do here in the United States.
So you're saying they're fleeing the socialist countries?
No, I'm saying they're fleeing the damage that Reagan did. That for 30 and 40 years, I mean, look at Ortega, the guy who was, he was the great Contra leader. He was this great leftist. Now he's turned into a right-wing crazy, he's running, what is it, Honduras or Guatemala? I get my countries mixed up. If we wanted to take $5 billion and go into those countries, we don't have a problem with Mexico. Mexico is not. Mexicans are not flooding into the United States right now. Mexicans are by and large leaving the United States. But those countries down there where life is hell, $5 billion, we could rebuild their democracies. We could do a Marshall Fund like we did after World War II. We screwed it up, Brian.
Well, we just sent them $10 billion a couple of months ago. I mean, we send them money all the time. They just squander it. We're sending countries money, and they're not doing what's right with it. These governments are corrupted. I mean, Mexico is pretty much a narco state, a failed narco state. And the Mexicans aren't coming here is because we have a new program where we kick them out instantly. They come across the border, we send them right back.
If you think Mexico is a failed narco state, you've not spent much time in Mexico, Brian.
How many states are controlled in Mexico by the cartel?
Oh, there's a few. There absolutely are, and their government is dealing with that. But what does that have to do with a wall?
We border a state that has more crime than Afghanistan.
Why is it that every Republican member of Congress who represents a district that is on the Mexican border, and Will Hurd represents the largest district, he's got 800 miles of border between the United States and Mexico in his congressional district. He's a Republican. Why is it that 100% of these Republican members of Congress, of the House of Representatives, are opposed to the wall? Why?
Yeah, I don't know the stat, and I can't answer for them, but there is a problem down there. And I'm just, I'm not a politician. I'm a common American person. I've been down there. I lived in Tucson for 10 years. I've seen the issue. I've been on the border. I spoke with people who live on the border. I was down there 2 weeks ago. I saw people just pouring across the border unchecked, and no one stopping them. Groups of 40 people.
Yeah, and as long as Donald Trump keeps hiring them, they'll keep coming.
You know what? And I'm with you. People, that's ridiculous. And
no, but the Republican Party isn't. I mean, instead of building a stupid wall that's just going to cause people to get a visa and come through Tijuana legally,
let's stop people.
Let's put Trump in jail. All right, will you agree with me on that, Brian?
No, I don't think our president needs to be put in jail. But I do.
Why not? He's breaking the law. He's been doing it for decades.
Is he aware?
Aren't we a nation of laws?
We're a nation of laws. Maybe someone who handles his hiring practices.
Okay, let's put the head of the Trump organization in jail. Will you agree with me on that?
Who hires his people? That's what I'm talking about. Who hires his people? They need to be held accountable.
Okay, so I guess we found something we agree on. Brian Kolfage, I'm sorry, say it again, Brian.
Yeah, you said it correctly.
Kolfage, thank you. President and founder of We Build the Wall, Inc., the website webuildthewall.us, and you can tweet him at Brian Kolfage. Brian, thanks for dropping by today.
Yep, thanks.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, if we need a wall with Mexico, do we need a wall with Canada? Do we need a wall along our coasts? Come on, where does this end? Thank you for reminding me. Welcome back. Let's see here. Kelly, watching Free Speech TV in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Kelly, I'm assuming you're calling about our previous hour's topic, which was what is the real crisis that we're facing? Or what are the top crises that we're facing? If it's not, oh my God, people from Mexico.
Right. God bless you for making it through those phone calls, Tom. I could not do that. But you have convinced me to participate, and I became a precinct committee person. I'm now the county chair for Mojave County, which is geographically the 5th largest county in the United States.
Wow! And congratulations, Kelly. I applaud you.
You just had a caller call in that nailed it, and this is exactly what I've been explaining to my people, is that Lake Havasu used to have 6 or 7 precincts, Democratic precincts. We have 2 now. We have 2 because people stopped participating. And when I say stop participating, they aren't becoming PCs. And if they aren't becoming PCs, we don't fill all of our PC slots, which means we don't have all of our delegates, which means we don't have a voice.
PC is precinct committee person, right?
Yes, sir.
And so let me understand this. This is something I didn't realize, Kelly. So what you're saying is that you have, it's not that an area that would encompass 8 precincts has essentially merged into just 2 because you've only got 2 governing bodies. It's that 2/8 or 1/4, 3/4 of your area literally has no Democratic representation. They're just not showing up.
Well, people are showing up to the meetings, but they're not raising their hand to become a PC. And without becoming a PC, we don't get delegates. We don't. So the precincts get condensed into larger areas. So now instead of, walking 2 blocks to talk to your neighbors while you're a PC in that small area, now you're walking 20 blocks.
Okay. So it's not like there's areas that are a desert, essentially, a political desert. It's rather that the areas are getting larger and larger, which makes them more and more unwieldy.
Well, because people aren't participating.
Right.
I love the fact that we've done nothing but boost membership in this county. We moved the needle 10 points to the left in this last election, which is unheard of.
That's great.
But we still have a ton of work, which requires people to participate. This is why I keep telling our people, and I will tell our people that, from now until the next election and the next cycle after that, we have to participate. And I will tell you, Tom, that we just had our state committee meeting to reelect our state officials, and the state party here in Arizona is solidly, and I mean solidly, progressive. We are changing things in this state.
Oh, yeah. And that's happening all over the country, Kelly.
Yes, sir.
I mean, it really and truly is. When the latest poll, this was just last week, I think it was Gallup. It might have been another polling organization, but it was one of the big ones. 81% of Democrats want Medicare for all.
I know.
I mean, it's like, and when Bernie first proposed that, back when he was on my show every Friday, and Bernie first proposed Medicare for all in the United States Senate, he literally could not get one Democrat to co-sponsor it. Not one. This was like, 4 or 5 years ago. And now 81.
We're going to keep moving forward.
Yeah, there you go. Kelly, thanks a lot for the call, and good on you for everything you're doing there in Arizona. I really appreciate it, and thanks again for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Just did a rant about how we have actually passed a major climate change tipping point that we can't walk back from. We can't stop it. This is coming now. It is unstoppable. This first step of it, which has to do with, the destruction of major cities in the United States and all around the world. You can check this out over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, or for people who support us on YouTube as well, you can see this. Get over to patreon.com/THOMHARTMANN to check this out. We're talking about how prior to a couple of years ago, and this is how, tipping points, you can only see them in the rearview mirror. Prior to a couple of years ago, in the winter, the Antarctic and Greenland would recover some of their ice. Now they're not even doing that. It's just pausing. The melting is just pausing. That's that tipping point. And the consequences of this are going to be terrible. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
/Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Dana in National City, California says here, you want to debate me about something? What's the deal, Dana? What am I missing?
Oh, wow. I was responding to the wall.
Okay.
Is what I was, and perhaps it is a debate, in that how much of these drugs are actually being brought across the border by, well, poor brown people, who then get these drugs to poor black people, who then distribute the drugs to Wall Street.
Well, first of all, the largest group that uses illegal drugs in the United States are white people, number one. Number two, a lot of and many of the Mexican cartels and whatnot are not being run by indigenous people, Mexican indigenous people. They're being run by people, like Vicente Fox, more of Spanish ancestry. So, you can disassociate essentially, I'm not saying you're a racist, but that perspective is racist. You can disassociate that from the drug problem, number one. Number two, if you're asking the question seriously, according to the U.S. government, and I don't recall which agency it was, but I think it was the DEA, over 90% of all drugs that come into the United States from south of the border come in 18-wheeler trucks or in side panels of cars, through legal checkpoints. I mean, literally millions of cars and trucks every day go north or south legally through the U.S. border. And that's where most of the drugs are passing. And Congress gave Donald Trump 2 years ago over $1 billion to beef up inspection and check into that stuff and start busting those people. And he never spent the money.
Well, I think you're basically saying you agree with me that it's sort of nonsense to build the wall because it's so small amount of drugs actually get packed.
Oh, and not only that, you know how El Chapo got convicted last week, right? He's going to prison. You know how he got his drugs into the United States?
I don't know.
He built tunnels under the wall.
Yeah.
Honest to God, he had a mile-long tunnel. I mean, it took him like a year to build it, and probably a couple of hundred laborers, and they moved hundreds of millions of dollars worth of drugs through that tunnel under the wall. I mean, to say the walls work is just crazy. It's just crazy. So
I actually knew someone that built tunnels under the wall, but I thought he was doing it for getting people across.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is they smuggle people through those as well.
Yeah.
But that was El Chapo's big thing, was he built tunnels. In fact, that's how he got out of prison. They tunneled him out of prison. It's just...
How can we even have this conversation, though? Everybody, that's not speak in presidential terms, thinks that the drugs come across this arid border, which I find really difficult to believe that anyone can humanly carry very much across.
Right.
It seems to me like if someone says this is where our drugs are coming from, I mean, they should be thought of as being ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. Donald Trump is lying to our faces, and he's got the Republican Party going, hey, if he says it, it must be true. It's insane.
Yeah, it's so incredulous.
Yeah.
And I think that is our biggest problem.
Yeah, if you want to identify a real crisis right now, it's in the White House. Dana, thank you. And it's Donald Trump and Mike Pence. And then secondarily, Mitch McConnell and the rest of the Republicans. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after the break here. Stick around. This is our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 election and the transformation of American politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?"
Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. Run, Bobby, Run is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Third Reich by William Shearer. Oh, the email I get is amazing. This first one I got yesterday. This is from Eric Trump. Dear Fred, for weeks, Democrats have been obstructing and the media have been making up lies about the crisis, in all caps, at our southern border. They continue to call it a, quote, manufactured crisis. There's nothing, quote, manufactured about American citizens dying at the hands of MS-13 gangs and drugs pouring through the weak spots of our border. On Friday, President Trump stood up and fought for America by declaring a national emergency. Democrats and the media tried to silence your voice in 2016, Fred, and now they're trying to silence you, Fred, again. Let's remind them that the most powerful voice in America is you, Fred, and crush our goal of fundraising $2 million. We are going to hand the president a list of all donors who stood with him at this critical time. Make sure he sees your name, Fred. Make a special donation by 11:59 p.m. EST to get on the list that we hand the president, and your donation will be instantly quadruple matched. Finish the wall. And there's my email account and my account number and my name. And oh, man. And then today, actually just about 10 minutes ago, I got this from Donald Trump himself. It's President's Day. We're having a 20% sale on all President's Day merchandise. You can get your Trump-Pence T-shirts. You can get your Build the Wall, Crime Will Fall bumper stickers. You can get your Make America Great hats, all at a discount. Remember when Trump said he'd be the first guy in the history of the United States to make money being president? Apparently he was right. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Tom. I was listening to your conversation with Brian Colfage, and it's one of those times when I thought about you. Go pick on somebody your own size, Tom. It was kind of not really a fair fight, if you want to characterize it that way.
It seemed. I was expecting a little more vim and vigor, but... Yeah.
Well, okay, but the thing that surprised me, and maybe you don't know about it, this is the guy that raised like $14 million to build the wall on a GoFundMe.
Oh, I didn't know that, Paul.
Oh, I really wanted to ask him about that, because what did he do with the money?
Yeah.
And I mean, through GoFundMe, he said this was during the holidays. He said that if the wall weren't built, and I don't know how he's going to get the money to the process anyway, but that he'd give the money back to all these people. And he was the one who was advertising and saying if every Trump voter gave $80, they'd have the $5.7 million.
Oh, I did see that on his website. I didn't realize that was a link to a GoFundMe page, though. Does GoFundMe actually, if you set a goal of $1,000 and you only raise $600, do you get the $600 or do you only get the money if you hit the goal of $1,000? I mean, maybe he hasn't hit his goal and he's not going to get the money.
I don't know about that.
I don't know how it works. I know some of those sites work like that. Others, you get whatever you get, and frankly, I don't know.
But the question is, then how do they give the money back?
Yeah, that's a good one.
In other words, if you don't hit your goal, they raise the $600. Do they give the money back to you and you distribute it back to the donors? I mean, how do they have no way of this? That's the problem.
Yeah. So I think, without specifically speaking about our guest, because he's not here to defend himself, and I don't know the details of this, but the one thing that I am pretty sure of is that there are three types of major grifters who are jumping on this bandwagon. There are the political grifters, right? Donald Trump being at the head of that list, people who are using a phony emergency for their own political purposes. There are the garden variety scam artists, running GoFundMe pages and things like that. And then there are the grifters who are the corporate grifters. I mean, if Trump gets $5 billion or $8 billion or whatever he's going to take out of the federal budget for funding, who's he going to give that money to? Is Halliburton going to get the contract? Is it going to be a company?
That's right. And
is it going to be the Trump company?
For Donald Trump running as an outsider, he's sure pulling a lot of insider moves right now.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing he's doing. The other thing, I mean, and your guest notwithstanding, he did call Mexico a failed narco state. Okay, so this is the justification for the national emergency to call Mexico a failed narco state. This has already been going on in the right-wing media. So my question is, okay, and so why are we negotiating a trade deal with a failed narco state, and why are jobs being sent to a failed narco state? Hand over,
Yep.
I mean, companies moving their operations to this failed narco state. I mean, this is such baloney.
Yeah.
And as you said, El Chapo was saying,
as the government, the Secretary,
also to your guest's point, that they've set up this narco state right next to right outside our back door. The reason is because the United States of America and white people in it are the biggest consumers of illegal drugs in the world.
That's
Important security message.
I mean, so
and by the way,
work on some other national emergency, like your opiate epidemic, and maybe we should be throwing money into that. So if people weren't such consumers of these drugs, then maybe we wouldn't have to have this wall, so to speak. And as you said, and El Chapo even said, as you said, the drugs are coming through the ports of entry. I don't see people walking, 60 miles through the desert with a couple of bags of reefer on them.
Yeah.
It's
It's only in the imagination of Stephen King.
Exactly.
But yeah, and by the way, the extent to which white people in the United States are abusing illegal drugs, there is an actual statistical and I know you know this, Paul, a clear statistical correlation between the destruction of the middle class. As the middle class goes down in wealth and income, the use of drugs by people in that what used to be the middle class goes up. And so, you want to reduce the demand for drugs from south of the border, go back to unions. Give people decent...
And look at I believe Mr. Kovacs is from Ohio, where I don't think there's the largest population of Hispanic but regardless, it is one of the centers of the biggest opiate problem. He's got the drug problem there.
Yeah.
That's where it's Ohio, Kentucky, it's the lower Midwest or the upper Midwest, and he's seeing the problem that's his problem.
Yeah.
It's not Mexico forcing it on him.
Yeah, tragically.
It's not like he sees Hispanic people or people of color all the time in his neighborhood. But he does see the drug problem, and that's the thing. If you remember the book Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, he actually moved back from his big lawyering job in California. He moved back to Southern Ohio to open a clinic because his mother, who's about our age, late 50s or early 60s, is still on dope.
Oh, geez.
For her whole life, she's been.
Yeah.
And that's why J.D. Vance moved back to Ohio. So this is his problem in his state. So, I tell you what, Mr. Kovacs, maybe you ought to consider fixing the problems in your state before you start telling us we all need to pony up for a wall.
There you go. Well said. Paul, thank you. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Hey, Professor, what does the Bible say was the root of all of humanity's evil?
Love of money?
The love of money. So here's what we got to do. We got to get rid of the billionaire class. We didn't have them folks before Ronald Reagan got up in there. And the problem we got is you wrote this book in 2006 called Screwed, The Undeclared War in the American Middle Class.
Yep.
One of the things that I took from that was damn near 70% of the people don't read anything. So you can tell them anything you want. Okay, so what we got to do is get KPFK to go to all 3,000 counties in the United States. He got a little bit more than 3,000, but about 3,000 counties. We're going to start with the Thom Hartmann Program. That runs about 15 hours a week, 3 hours a day, okay? So now the people can be better informed, because now the rationale will be the national emergency is going to be we need more non-commercial media. That's going to be the rationale, right? And the next time you're sitting down having lunch with Ocasio-Cortez, tell her that instead of her taking credit for that tax program, tie it into Dwight Eisenhower. Say, this is what Dwight Eisenhower will want us to do. Show the Republicans, when there were some good Republicans out there, they ain't got no more because they've all sold out for money. And in terms of the election coming up, Professor, we're going to have to go with Biden and Stacey Abrams. Now, the reason why we got to go with Biden, now,
You mean
not my
Stacey
first
Abrams?
choice. Stacey Abrams, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for the correction. Thank you very much, Professor, for the correction. We got to go with Biden because, you see, we can't send a female up there to go toe-to-toe with Trump. Now, Biden can say things that a woman can't say. He can have a vulgar mouth, and he'll get a pass on it. But a woman can't do that, you see. So we got to go with a guy that we think is. What I would do is I'd fix him up a little bit, make him look like Pence, put some more gray hair in him, thinking out his hair a little bit, and make him look more, pretty for the camera. But we got to go with Mr. Biden because he's the only one that can talk that game against Mr. Trump. To make a appeal to that class of people we're going to need.
Well, we will see, Morris. I personally, I prefer somebody a little more progressive, but I will take anybody who can beat Donald Trump and who is going to move the Democratic Party, even if it's incrementally, in the right direction. Amen. Morris, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for the shout out to our nonprofit stations. We're on Pacifica stations all over the country, and of course, our largest nonprofit venue is Free Speech TV, which freespeech.org. You can find on the internet as well as on Dish and Direct, and of course we're on commercial radio stations as well, and we're very happy to be there as well. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I'm just astonished with what you just said. I mean, where are you getting this idea that Daniel Ortega is this crazy right winger now? Where did you get this from?
What did I miss, Jared? Educate me.
Daniel Ortega is one of the leading progressive figures in Latin America.
Okay, so who's the guy down there who's running a country who's now putting journalists in jail?
That would be probably one of the client regimes that we support, like in, I don't know.
Oh, it definitely
Colombia.
is. I thought it was Ortega. I mean, I may well be wrong, Jared. I may well be wrong. I'll have to look it up. I will.
Max Blumenthal. Yes,
say what?
Definitely. Max Blumenthal. Check out his reporting on Nicaragua.
Okay, I'll do it. I know Max. Max is a friend of mine. Jared, thanks a lot for the call. I'll have to do a little more self-education here, apparently. We're going to check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world in just a second. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we'll be checking in with Talk Media News in just a moment and continuing our conversation as our day rolls along. And welcome back. Is it Mena or Mina in St. Paul, Nebraska, watching Free Speech TV?
It's Mina.
Hey, Mina, what's up?
My national emergency is suicide, veteran suicide.
Yeah.
Since Trump has been president, 16,632 veterans have committed suicide.
And they're starting now to commit suicide in the parking lots of the VA as a way of making a statement about how terrible things are.
Yes,
and not specifically terrible at the VA, but just, hey, I want to do it visibly. I want to see this. I want this suicide to be associated with my service.
And this is not a new problem. It's been 10 years since Dave and I wrote an article for our local newspaper about veteran suicides.
Yeah. Well, and there was a big surge of them after the Vietnam War, too. I mean, some people come back. War is legalized, organized mass killing. And there's something in most of us, those of us who are not sociopaths, that just even the very idea of killing another person is revolting or compelling. I mean, it's why murder is typically the crime that's committed on shows on TV, on cop shows, because it's such an unthinkable thing. That there's kind of a weird fascination with it, I suppose, or at least with finding the murderer, finding that person. But when you put somebody in a situation where all of their whole entire life they've been taught, don't hurt, don't kill, and then they're taught to kill, and then they go out and they do kill, or they participate in killing, or they watch killing, many people come back and have a really, really hard time dealing with that. My dad, just before he died, talked with one of my kids about how when he was on patrol in Japan after World War II, he shot at a guy, and he never knew if he hit him. He never knew if he killed him. But for the rest of his life, he was haunted by that. I mean, to the point that he was like doing a deathbed confession. It's just, this is serious, serious stuff.
And we are creating more by getting into more involved.
Yes.
Are we going into Venezuela?
God forbid. I mean,
God forbid. I would like to add that I did read that gentleman was returning all of the GoFundMe funds that he collected. Now, I did a GoFundMe for a billboard, and I put my money in for the billboard, and then I was charged $5 to use the GoFundMe. I would assume they'll get their GoFundMe money back, but not the GoFundMe charge of $5.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We probably should have done a little deeper research on that particular situation. Mina, thank you so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I was listening to your debate with your guest, and he said some things that reminded me of when I was in Iraq. And a lot of people, a lot of very senior generals and colonels and whatnot were really going through this wall zeal in Iraq, as a solution. You separate Iraqi Kurds, you separate Sunni and Shiite, you separate the combating parties. Okay,
well, that was kind of Joe Biden's solution back in the day, right? Remember he said break Iraq into 3 countries?
Yes, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, similar to what Joe Biden said. Yes, similar. The reason why, and their solution was to actually build a wall, which is a military fortification. Let's not kid ourselves of what it is, right?
Right.
And I lost that debate because of, a lot of Iraqis were for it. But I witnessed over time the guys that won the debate, it soured on them because it's not cost effective. And I know you brought that up, but I just wanted to say it from my perspective.
Right. Yeah, you build a 12-foot wall, people make 13-foot ladders. I mean, it's just, that's what it comes down to. Dave, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story with us. I appreciate it. It's always nice to hear from you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. One of the really great ways that you can support our program, specifically just the Thom Hartmann program here, and all the work that we're doing, is by going to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, all run together, and signing up. Become a supporter of our program. And we have special content that's only available to our Patreon supporters, including a rant that we just put up about this amazing thing that I just learned. I learned this from Professor Barack Orbach of the University of Arizona Medical School, or Law School, that Robert Bork's bizarre idea that it doesn't matter how big companies get, it doesn't matter how destructive they are of competition, it doesn't matter how they wipe out local communities, all that matters is that consumers have low prices, led to directly the Walmartization of America. It was adopted by the Supreme Court in '77, by Reagan in '82, and it's still the law. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hi, Thom Hartmann here with you. I forgot it's President's Day, which is a holiday, and Talk Media News doesn't work on holidays, so we'll have a news report tomorrow. But in the meantime, let's continue our conversation of all the various things that we've been talking about today. In our first hour, what is the real crisis? In our second hour here, what about Trump's so-called wall? On the line with Johnny in Calexico, California. Am I saying that right, Johnny?
Danny.
Yeah, you're on the air.
Yeah, Danny.
Oh, Danny, I'm sorry. Hey, Danny, what's up?
How is it that Americans that live so far away from the border think that they know more about the border issue than us that live along the 4 states that border?
So you live near Mexico,
including the mayor of El Paso that told Trump that there's no border crisis.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you our experience. I live in Calexico. That's California. That's on the border with Mexicali, Baja California.
Uh-huh.
Well, had any Arab terrorists travel with a caravan, the migrants themselves would have fingered them.
Yeah.
They weren't going to want to jeopardize their already slim chances of getting asylum.
Yeah.
And how is it that the White House and that the right wing talk radio hosts know that from 500 to 600 criminals were traveling among the migrants?
Trump just pulled that number out of his backside, shall we say?
Yeah, and the other thing, 1 mile of solid concrete wall will cost a lot more than miles of metal, 30-foot metal barriers that you can see through, which is what the Border Patrol here are saying. They want to be able to see through it, so they can see when if
what's going on the other side.
If indeed.
But on the other hand, if you're trying to stop drugs, I mean, all you'd have to do is just take 8.5 by 11 envelopes, those like FedEx overnight envelopes kind of things, and you could put 2 or 3 ounces of heroin in there and just slide it between the slats, and just slide hundreds of those things through. I mean,
in our local newspaper here in Imperial County, daily there are busted vehicles, either trucks, either trucks or cars, trains, even tourist buses. They get busted with drugs.
Yeah. Well, that's the easy way to do it, and that's it's sort of like mice. See one, count 100. I'm sure that there's a lot more that gets through, but it's not people hauling drugs on their back. Like Steve King's, with his cantaloupe thighs or calves or whatever it was comment. I mean, that was just so obscene. It was so wrong. Danny, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story with us about living next to the border. Ivan in Bartlett, Illinois. Hey, Ivan.
Hey, what's up, Tom? Welcome back.
Thank you.
Hey, the caller who was talking about vets dying segues and what I want to say.
Okay.
The greatest crisis, in my opinion, we face is having end-time Christians, fascists, and warmongers in the White House setting policies that will keep us in perpetual war, thereby stealing the treasure that we could be using for 21st century infrastructure, education, healthcare, climate change, ending poverty, by creating millions of good jobs, and most of all, the refugee crisis worldwide.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that, Ivan.
And all you have to look at, Pence, God-appointed Trump president, warmongers, Bolton, Pompeo, another end times Christian.
Yep.
And now we got this murderer, the war criminal, Elliot Abrams, doing the policy in Venezuela, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
And most of all, Stephen Miller. But you know what, Tom? We have some good candidates like Tulsi Gabbard. She has been completely ignored when she brought up these perpetual wars that we're in.
Yeah.
And another good candidate, Andrew Yang.
Yeah, he's been on this show.
And, of course, Bernie.
Yeah. And I'm guessing Bernie's probably going to announce shortly, because it looks like he's put together a video doing that. I don't know, I don't have any inside information, but I'd be amazed if he didn't jump into the race. So
these candidates, they realize the war on terror and the war on drugs have been both and are complete failures.
Yeah. Well, and not just failures, Ivan, they're frauds. I mean, they were frauds from the get-go. They were just scams for political purposes, and also as a way of diverting more federal money to the buddies of the guys who were declaring them. Ivan, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program? All 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com /Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out. Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971.
That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
They'll be willing to truly embrace the question as the dismissive aside or a hasty pejorative. Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes, our book for the day.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The thing about Donald Trump declaring an emergency and then, going to play golf and stand in the omelet line and all this kind of stuff. The thing, and welcome back to the program, by the way. We had an interesting debate in the last hour about the wall. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. Oh, hey, I didn't realize that Karen was here. Hang on just a second. I am missing a page. There we go. Karen Hobart Flynn is on the line with us. She is the president of Common Cause, commoncause.org. At Common Cause is the Twitter handle, and her personal one is at K Hobart, H-O-B-E-R-T, Flynn, F-L-Y-N-N. Karen, my apologies. I missed my cue here. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So glad to have you with us. So, I was starting to go off on a rant here about Trump's so-called state of emergency. In fact, we've been talking about it for the last 2 hours. And I understand that Common Cause is among, one of a number of organizations and now apparently a number of states that are going to be suing to stop this. And I'm curious if you could give us kind of an overview of the basis for that, where do you derive standing? How do you expect this to play out? And, well, let's start there, and then I have another question for you.
Sure. So at this point, Common Cause is not bringing a lawsuit, although we are closely looking at it. There are many other groups that are, as a matter of fact. Public Citizen, which is a group that we work in coalition with on behalf of landowners in Texas, and an environmental group. They'll be looking at the legality of seizing huge swaths of private, state, and tribal land to build a wall along the entire border. We've seen the ACLU plans to sue, as well as the Attorney General for the state of California, both for the impacts it could have in California, including the impact of diverting other money to the wall. And they've also said that they are reaching out, and there will probably be many other states suing. And in addition, there could be a lawsuit by Congress. And I think there are three significant legal issues with Trump's declaration of a national emergency. First, his claims about the national emergency have been debunked by experts and many in his own federal agencies. If you recall, there was testimony by intelligence chiefs in January to the Senate Intelligence Committee where they outlined the biggest national security threats. They talked about Korea, China, North Korea, China, Iran, Russia, and never brought up the challenges at the Mexican border.
Yeah, not to mention climate change.
That's right. Also, there's no big surge in immigration. It's been declining for years. There's no terrorist invasion of Mexico. His claims of drug trafficking coming across the border is not true, and most illegal drug trafficking comes through legal ports of entry. Second, though, is also that there is no emergency that allows him to utilize the military in this matter. So he talks about his justification is to initiate military construction projects in the event of a national emergency. That necessitates military action, and then it's only when there's a military action can a construction project come about. He's sort of flipping it on its head. Really, he needs military action for them to build the wall. There's also the Posse Comitatus Act, which dates back to Reconstruction in the wake of Civil War, that prohibits military engagement in law enforcement activities with respect to civilians, which also means immigrants, unless Congress specifically authorizes it. So, in effect, they can't do this kind of measure. And then he undermines himself when he talks about calling this national emergency, and I think his own words can be used against him. If you recall, on Friday he talked about, I didn't need to do this, but I just want to do it much faster when he was speaking about building the wall.
Well, plus he had 2 years with the Republicans controlling the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court. And, presumably if this was that big a deal, he could have done something about it. It only became a crisis, A, when the Democrats got control of the House of Representatives, and B, when he really seriously kicked into gear running for his reelection for 2020, at least from where I'm sitting. That's how it looks. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually, I do think that he is trying to just make good on his call and response line that he's constantly using when he does these rallies. Mm-hmm. He says that he gets this tremendous support from everybody there when he starts going into the need for building this wall. And I also think it's part and parcel with his continued attack on immigrants. And you're right, Republicans didn't want to do this, and they still don't, because the measure that they passed to avert a second government shutdown gave him very little of the money that he wants. And so really, I think we have to be looking at Congress to see whether they are going to rein in this really dangerous precedent, this abuse of presidential power, especially given that over the last 2 years when Republicans were in charge in Congress, they didn't rein in his abuses of power.
Right.
And so I think that, raises some significant questions.
And let's be very clear, when he's talking about immigrants, he's talking about a very particular type of immigrant, that would be being by and large people with more melanin in their skin, more color to their skin than he has. I mean, the Trump organization just a few months ago applied to whoever they apply to bring in a couple of dozen more immigrants to work at one of the Trump properties. I mean, they constantly are bringing in immigrants, but they're bringing them in from Western Europe by and large, and Eastern Europe.
Right.
But they want white people coming in. They just don't want people of color coming in. That's the bottom line. Now, a question, you said that to have a state of emergency that can then lead to construction, there has to be a military element to this, particularly if he's, basically borrowing money out of military construction funds. Do you think that it's possible that there might be some sort of a, false flag sounds a little too conspiracy-ish, but some sort of a confrontation? We've already seen once where Trump had the military, lobbing tear gas grenades across the border into Mexico. That he might be looking for some sort of precipitating incident that he can say, this is the thing that justifies what I'm doing, and that he might even provoke that.
I think that is definitely possible because I think, on legal grounds, he has a very shaky case here. So there has to be, in my mind, something that precipitates the need for military action.
Yeah. Now to try to glass half full rather than half empty this, if Trump succeeds in having his declaration, if the lawsuits fail, presumably at the Supreme Court where he's got, good buddies, and we've basically rewritten the Constitution now to where the president, with on the basis of this 1970s law, can change the provision that says only Congress can appropriate and spend money. If that all works for him, does that mean that the next president, President Warren, President Sanders, President Harris, President Booker, whoever it may be, that if the next president is a Democrat, that president could say, Trump did this, he did it successfully, and he did it over, a couple thousand people coming across the southern border. We've got a real climate emergency. We have a real existential threat to literally the survival of the human race, much less civilization in the United States. It's already killing hundreds of Americans a year. It's causing hundreds of billions of dollars of damage already. And therefore, the president, new president, I am going to use a state of emergency to get done what Congress is incapable of doing because so many of them are being funded by the fossil fuel industry.
I think that is a possibility. We could be looking at climate change. We could be looking at gun rights, all kinds of things. Although I don't think it's a given. There are, a lot of things that can happen between now and then. One is I know that the House Judiciary Committee is launching an investigation into the matter to look at constitutional and statutory issues and let the president know that they're going to be calling on Department of Justice and White House officials to testify. I think it's possible that there will be a joint resolution that could get bipartisan support in the House and Senate if the president vetoes it. Not sure whether they can overcome that, but that's a fight worth having.
Right.
I saw Senate Democrats introduce a bill to prevent Trump from using, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and Army Corps of Engineer disaster relief money for this wall. That could be a compromise measure that passes. I mean, what's at stake here that concerns me most is, if Congress surrenders its constitutional authority over financial and budgetary matters, and actually its exclusive power to appropriate funds,
right.
What does Congress stand for? That completely eviscerates our checks and balances.
Well, and the Constitution itself. It's really quite extraordinary. We're talking with Karen Hobart Flynn, the president of Common Cause. Karen, I'm going to hit a hard break here in a minute. So quick question. We know that when Dick Cheney became vice president, Halliburton was on the verge of bankruptcy. And the war in Iraq was just a wonderful thing for Halliburton. Suddenly, it became a billion-dollar company and very, very, very profitable, and his shares in it were worth millions as a result of that war. Do we know if there are any wall-building contractors or steel-making contractors who are in tight with Trump that might be kind of a secondary purpose for his obsession with this?
I don't know the answer, but that's a fascinating question that we'll look at.
Yeah, because I look back at what happened with Halliburton and the whole thing in Iraq, and had it not been for the war in Iraq and all those no-bid contracts that Dick Cheney basically walked down to the Pentagon, his company, because of the acquisition of Dresser Industries and that huge asbestos liability, they literally were on the edge of bankruptcy. And yeah, amazing stuff. Karen, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks for having me.
It's great talking with you. CommonCause.org, the website. Common Cause, the Twitter handle. And, of course, Karen's is K. Hobart Flynn, HobertFlynn. Karen Hobart Flynn, the president of Common Cause. Thank you again. We will be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's 18 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. Stick around. And welcome back. Dick in Champaign, Illinois, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Dick, what's up?
Oh, I have a question about the Treaty of Guadalupe, which finished the Mexican-American War.
Right.
And I have a report that says that a clause in that treaty guarantees free passage back and forth of Mexican and U.S. citizens, and that passage has never been repealed. I wonder what implications there are for Trump's wall.
That's an interesting question. I mean, that was in the 1840s. President Polk was the guy who signed that, was he not?
Yeah.
Yeah. This was before we had any consequential immigration laws. I mean, we didn't really have our first immigration laws in the United States outside of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1880, whatever it was, 83 or whenever that was. But other than that, we really didn't have any laws like that until the 1920s, 1930s. And, you know, when we started putting quotas and all this kind of stuff, and that was kind of the end of the whole Ellis Island thing. My grandfather snuck in underneath that, you know, in 1917. But I would guess that even if the Treaty of Guadalupe, and I'm no authority on this at all, Dick. I just, you know, I have some passing knowledge of that era. But I would guess that even if that treaty guarantees the ability of U.S. and Mexican citizens to freely move from country to country, that there is some reasonable limit on that. You know, in other words, if somebody's a criminal, if somebody can't demonstrate their citizenship, if you know, it just seems reasonable. But like I said, this was before we started having these things, so I honestly don't know. That's a good one. Let me just toss that out to everybody, and if anybody knows about that or has any more information on that than Dick or I have, we'd love to hear it. Dick, thanks a lot for raising that. That's an interesting question. Pam in Fort Collins, Colorado, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Pam, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for letting me be heard. I wanted to add something to what the real crisis is, and I think a lot of people brought up some great ideas like climate change, health care, endless wars, and such. And I think all of those come down to a root cause, which is really income and wealth inequality, which I have a solution for, and three immediate results that would result from it. I think Bernie and Elizabeth and AOC have the right proposal by taxing wealth and inheritance. But I think we should take it a little bit further based on the thesis that there's a pathology with having too much money and a pathology with having too little money. So you need to set a minimum and a maximum wage, and they should be, you know, probably not more than 5 times from each other, because really, can somebody work 5 times harder than anyone else?
Well, the standard that was in the military and in most universities right up until the 60s was 10-1, and then it went to 20-1 for the military, I believe. But I think it's still at 20-1.
Okay, so for the sake of argument, let's say 10 times harder.
Sure.
I would say that single mom works 10 times harder than an executive at, you know, Wall Street or a Fortune 500 company, because those people have staff around them that I'm going to run out of time.
Yeah,
anyway,
you are. No, but I get what you're saying, Pam, and I completely agree with it. And the way you have their maximum wage is with tax policy. That's what we had before Reagan. You know, people didn't want to pay 91% income tax, so they just put the money back in the company, or they paid their employees. Minimum wage obviously needs to be increased, and maybe even a guaranteed universal income. Pam, thank you. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans. What do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it. Back, Thom Hartmann here with you. Interesting piece by Jennifer Rubin, who is a Republican, you know, and old school Republican who writes for the Washington Post, and she's on TV a lot these days and all that kind of stuff. And an interesting piece in today's Washington Post titled "How to Screw Up an Emergency Declaration in 10 Easy Steps." And basically she gives the lie, you know, kind of following on from our conversation with Karen just a moment ago. She gives the lie to Trump's assertion that we actually have an emergency on our border. Now, I would argue that we do have several actual emergencies. We have a climate change emergency. We have a middle-class income and wealth emergency. We have a student debt emergency. We have a healthcare emergency. We've got a gun death emergency. We've got an addiction emergency. And every single one of those things are legitimate emergencies, legitimate crises. You know, there's an old saying in business that one of the most important things that a manager can do, one of the most important decisions that you have to make, is separating what's urgent from what's important. And, you know, something might be really important, but it's not urgent. And so you can work on it slowly over a period of time and you get it done. On the other hand, there are some things that are urgent, but they may not be all that important. But because they're urgent, they're right in front of you, you jump at them and, you know, do something, and then you forget about the important stuff. And then, of course, the most important decision is figuring out what is both urgent and important. And I would argue that everything that I just listed is both urgent and important, and therefore could qualify as an emergency, depending on how you're defining the terms and depending on, you know, what you want to do about what you're calling an emergency. But people coming into the United States seeking asylum from Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, you know, from countries that basically are falling apart as a result of you know, Reaganism, that is not an emergency. I mean, it is for them. And certainly it is something that we should be doing something about. But building a wall is not what we should be doing about it. You know, that's not the way to deal with this. And similarly, you know, people from Mexico coming to the United States looking for work, you know, that's not an emergency. And there's easy ways to deal with this that we did for a century, you know, that I talked about earlier. But with Trump's saying that this is both urgent and important, first of all, he had the Republican Party for 2 whole years in Congress and did nothing about this. Therefore, it's neither urgent nor important. He was offered $25 billion for border security in exchange for legalizing the Dreamers. If it was a real emergency, you know, what, 800,000 people get legal status in exchange for $25 billion for the wall? That sounds like, you know, if it was a real emergency, I would go for that. Third, he had this continuing resolution that kept the government running. He signed it. Where's the emergency? He had a 35-day shutdown, and then he said, you know, where's the emergency? The appropriators, you know, Congress, they actually reached an agreement, and Trump did sign that, no emergency. There is literally no report, nothing demonstrating that this is an emergency.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But there are real critical emergencies, and we should have a conversation about prioritizing those and what we're going to do about it once the fossil fuel Republicans are gone. Confessions of a Rogue Nuclear Regulator by Gregory B. Jackso, former chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'm going to start with the last paragraph of Chapter 1, and then I'll start reading Chapter 2. In hindsight, the Fukushima incident revealed what has long been the sad truth about nuclear safety. The nuclear power industry has developed too much control over the NRC and Congress. In the aftermath of the accident, I found myself moving from my role as a scientist impressed by nuclear power to a fierce nuclear safety advocate. I now believe that nuclear power is more hazardous than it's worth.
Because the industry relies too much on controlling its own regulation, the continued use of nuclear power will lead to catastrophe in this country or somewhere else in the world. This is a truth we must all confront. Chapter 2. The Fukushima accident in Japan was not the first accident to belie the promise of nuclear power. In its early years, the commercial nuclear industry had only a limited understanding of the operations, science, and engineering of actual power plants. This ignorance led to the first major nuclear power plant accident just outside Harrisburg, the state capital of Pennsylvania, in 1979. 3 Mile Island prompted a flurry of reforms and a pile of promises that the public would be protected from future nuclear calamities. Through the mid-1980s, it appeared these promises were being kept. Construction on new plants slowly resumed without major accidents. Then suddenly, strange radiation measurements were detected in Sweden. Governments in Europe and throughout the world soon learned that a disaster had occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Soviet Union. Like a developing photograph in a bath of chemicals, the reality of nuclear power was starting to come clear. One nuclear accident was an oversight, a mistake, an aberration. 2 nuclear accidents hinted at a serious problem with the technology. A third would cement the conclusion that nuclear power plants were simply going to have accidents on a relatively consistent schedule. After 3 Mile Island, after Chernobyl, the third accident nearly occurred in 2002 at the troubled Davis-Besse nuclear power plant in Ohio. The problem is that with each new accident, all the people in charge of nuclear safety seemed to revert to the belief that this one would be the last one. As chairman of the NRC, I battled nearly every day against this instinct to believe that the worst was over. You can prepare for the next accident only if you get all the players to admit that a next one is coming. Even if and when are impossible to predict. Before Fukushima, too many people I encountered simply did not believe the next one would ever come. Their view is not surprising. Accidents are rare, and Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island had happened decades earlier. Yet I continue to believe I could challenge this complacency. I seized one opportunity just after I became chairman. 4 days before President Obama tapped me to lead the commission, I spoke at a conference organized by the North American Young Generation in Nuclear, an industry group of professionals entering the field as nuclear operators, designers of reactors, or academic experts in nuclear technology. As I looked out at the crowd, it dawned on me that many of these people had never lived through a nuclear power accident. Even if I had been only 9 years old when 3 Mile Island occurred, when Chernobyl happened, I was a teenager, more worried about surviving my freshman year of high school than about nuclear disaster. The people I was speaking to were even younger. I wondered how they had experienced these seminal events. Being a scientist, I decided to conduct an experiment. I asked everyone in the audience to stand if they were born after 1979, the year of 3 Mile Island. Nearly everyone stood. After they sat down, I asked them to stand if they were born after 1986, the date of the Chernobyl accident. Once again, nearly everyone stood. These industry-defining accidents have become dry case studies taught in college classes. The next generation of American nuclear power professionals has never experienced the confusion of a nuclear accident as it is happening. And so it's essential that we remember and teach the lessons of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, for reviewing these accidents shows common themes of missed opportunity, human failings, and technological overconfidence. No amount of forgetting can change these simple facts. The March 1979 accident at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania seems almost like something out of a science fiction horror film. The cover of Time magazine captured the national mood of chaos, confusion, and fear. The emergency red phrase "nuclear nightmare" slashed across the dark black cooling towers of the plant. There was no live-streamed video, as there would be after the Fukushima accident, but the public could imagine the scene inside the reactor. Just 12 days before the accident, The China Syndrome, a feature film starring Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas as reporters who uncover a major incident in a nuclear plant, had been released. Perhaps the hundreds of journalists gathered outside Harrisburg believed they too would land such a story. It started on March 28th at around 4 a.m. when a water pump stopped working. The failed pump affected the steam generators, large cylinders filled with many tiny metal tubes that help turn hot water from the nuclear engine into steam so that the turbines can generate electricity. When the flow of water was cut off, this massive heat exchange stopped working, creating the conditions for a serious accident. The reactor engine was immediately turned off, But so long as the reactor fuel remained hot, which it would for quite some time, its natural radioactive decay would continue, producing enough heat, called decay heat, to melt through the metal containers enclosing the reactor fuel. This same problem would later affect Fukushima. And then he goes through the whole process there. Confessions of a Rogue Nuclear Regulator by Gregory B. Jackso.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's do a geeky science alert here. Da, 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 da. Geeky science. Okay, here we go. Okay. One of the things that they found, first of all, they're discovering all this incredible stuff that has to do with the bacteria in your gut. You know, the acidophilus is the one that's most famous, Rutaria another one. And they're discovering that if the gut bacteria is out of balance, it can cause everything from depression to obesity. And when it's in balance, it can cause, you know, everything from feeling good to being healthy and all this kind of stuff. One of the things that they just discovered. This is a remarkable study. It published over at ScienceDaily.com, and they looked into the relationship between the health of your gut, what's called the microbiota, the gut bacteria, and cardiorespiratory fitness. In other words, how often you get out of breath, how often, and I don't mean get out of breath in a bad way. I mean from exercise, right? How often you exercise. You know, do you walk a mile or two a day? And what they found is that the more people exercised in ways that increased the volume of blood being pumped by their heart and the amount of breathing that they were doing, oxygenating their blood, the healthier both the bacteria were and the larger number of bacteria and the more of the good bacteria and less of the bad bacteria. And you know, this is just absolutely fascinating stuff. I mean, this whole microbiome is an area that is, you know, just so fascinating. So anyhow, our geeky science for the day. Bill in Sunrise Beach, Missouri. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm a progressive, and I got a weird way of expressing my liking the idea of building the wall, but not Donald Trump's version.
Okay.
Roger Waters has expressed interest of doing the concert one more time on the Mexican-American border.
Who is Roger Waters? Forgive my ignorance.
Pink Floyd.
Oh, Pink Floyd. Okay. Oh, that wall.
That wall. Yeah. Yes, build the wall one more time.
Right.
And show people the you know, because his message of, you know, his political message is good in the presentation. And in one case, at the end of his tour that he did for 3 years in Argentina, I think he drew 437,000 people.
Wow.
And if he did it in the American border with our political situation now, it might be 1 million.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I don't know where he could get the land. I don't know. Some landowners who are concerned about having eminent domain and wiping their land out might offer him, you can use some of our property to stage this event.
That's interesting.
I don't know, but yeah, I think, I don't know if you're familiar. I mean, I'm sure you are familiar with Pink Floyd. But
yeah, I know who they are. When Pink Floyd came along, it was kind of after my time. It was after I was no longer a DJ and stuff like that. And I just, you know, I've heard a few of their songs. I'd recognize them, but that's about it. I'm not a fan. Yeah. And it's not because I'm not a fan. It's just, you know.
No, I understand. I understand completely. I understand. And but his presentation is worthwhile watching. And he has been political in a lot of his after he left Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
He has gotten involved in.
Well, that's great. I'll have to do some exploring on that. Bill, thanks a lot for that. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Good to hear from you. Mark in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Mark. Thanks for listening to KABQ. What's up? Mark? Oh, I think Mark hung up on himself. Sometimes that happens. Tim in Kent, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Tim. What's up?
Hey, how are you? Let me get you off speaker. Sorry about that. First of all, I'd like to say, listen to you guys all the time, Mr. Tom, and I'm a proud Teamster, was shop steward for a long time.
Cool.
Our local's 117. To go back to the original thing about what's important, voter suppression, it's got to be absolutely at the front of our charge.
Oh, that's huge, isn't it? Yes.
Oh, gosh, it's so huge. I mean, especially when you read off the stats of how many times Republicans really did not win.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, let's see. Go ahead.
No, so what you're saying is that you think that it's like there's so many of these crises are interrelated. You know, you have the Supreme Court in 1976 saying that billionaires can own politicians, and then 2 years later saying corporations can own politicians as well. That would be in the Buckley case, and then the First National Bank versus Bellotti case. So then that creates this problem where you've got wholly owned politicians who are making policy that basically ruins the country and sells us out to these big corporations. And then in order to maintain power, they start engaging in election fraud and things like that, and we're seeing this writ large in North Carolina right now. But the largest election fraud, of course, is what Chris Kobach and Brian Kemp down in Georgia and Chris Kobach in Kansas and these other guys with these phony voter purges like Jeb Bush did for George W. that got George W. Florida in 2000. And it's all tied together. It's all tied together, Tim. It's a crisis of democracy.
It absolutely, it's tied together. Another thing that it's connected to, I always call it education suppression, where you have school funding being drained and you have nothing but the hate radio filling these people's brains with fake news. I hate to use that term.
But it's real.
Can I ask one thing before we go on? The list this morning that you were reading of how to spend the wall, where was that from?
It was, I'm pretty sure it was in the Washington Post, but it might have been.
Okay.
Oh, no, it was the New York Times. I'm sorry. And it was about.
New York Times.
Yeah, in fact, I've got it right here. It was in the Sunday Review about 2 weeks ago. It was on February 6th.
Okay, that's perfect. And I wanted to kind of float a funny idea. Is Trump's constant focus with MS-13 and the Mexican border a way to free up drug markets for the pharmaceutical companies and for his Russian goons? I mean, I know it's kind of far out, but you were talking earlier with that conservative, and you both had agreed that there was the narco states that were run. So I don't think the drugs are coming through people walking across the border. I totally agree. It's hidden in semi-trucks and stuff. But this is a major market that they want. Is there any way he's freeing markets for other goons that he's involved in?
I doubt it. I think that his MS-13 thing is code for brown people. I think most of this is really just very thinly veiled racism. That's Donald Trump's base now. I mean, that's what it's boiled down to is white racists.
Absolutely.
It seems like there's pretty much nobody else left. Tim, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Good to hear from you. Dave in Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Have you ever heard of a guy named Dar Jamal?
Oh, Dar sat right next to me just 2 weeks ago talking about his new book, The End of Ice.
Yes, that's what I wanted to bring up, and the issue of climate change and his talking about the disappearing of the glaciers and how it affects the water supplies, irrigation, and climate change itself, to me, is the crisis. It affects almost everything.
Yeah, if we're going to declare a national emergency, that's the one to do. And by the way, my interview with Dar is on YouTube, on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I didn't catch it. I don't catch your show every day, so I probably missed it. But one of the things that I did want to bring up, though, is, and I think he talked about, is we've gotten so far along. There's a lot of this stuff is already baked into the cake, and I think we're going to really have to seriously talk about mitigating some of the really dire circumstances, and of course we have to do everything we can to slow things down, but this is going to take a major radical effort worldwide, and I really don't see it happening right now, and it's distressing, and but like you say, despair is not an option.
Yeah, amen. No, we've got to work on this. And I think the good news is that, all over the world people are waking up, and all over the United States people are waking up. And I don't know how much longer the Republicans will be able to continue taking money from the fossil fuel industry and lying to our faces. I mean, they did that with the tobacco industry for years and years. In 2000, Mike Pence wrote an op-ed about how tobacco doesn't cause cancer, because he was taking money from the tobacco industry. Eventually, that became politically unacceptable. And I have a feeling that within the next 2 years, you're going to find a very similar dynamic to what happened between 1998 and 2001 with regard to tobacco, which was in large part as a result of lawsuits. But I think in this case, it's going to be more and more natural disasters.
Do we have that much time, though?
Well, the IPCC says we've got another 10 or 11 years. There are others who suggest, we've passed the point of no return. We clearly have passed the point of no return with regard to the melting of the glaciers, sea level rise and ice in the Arctic. Whether those are going to be civilization-ending events or even humanity-ending events, or whether they're simply going to be highly disruptive, is something that is still being debated. So, hope dies last.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately, the last people to really feel the effects are going to be the truly big, ultra-rich, which have had a lot to do with causing the problem.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And they know it. And like I said earlier, I think it's like a smash and grab operation. They're getting everything they can right now, from the tax breaks to everything else, and then, hey, let the ship go down. I've got my $1 trillion. Dave, thanks for the call. Richard in Alamosa, Colorado. Am I saying it right, Richard?
Alamosa, that's exactly right. It's a group of Alamo.
Okay, what's up?
Which is a tree. Anyway, the reason I was calling was because I recently saw a documentary about the Prohibition, and it just occurred to me how the Prohibition against drugs has created really the entire quote-unquote drug problem. I mean, really, the war on drugs is the problem. And my feeling is that we need to address this by legalizing drugs and creating healthcare centers or rehab centers across the nation, spend all of this drug enforcement money that we're spending right now trying to interdict drugs coming into the country, spend all of that money on facilities to help people get off of drugs, get over their addiction to drugs. It's our demand for these drugs that is causing the problem. It isn't the existence of the drugs or them coming across the southern border. And at the same time, much of what we see in Central and South America, vis-a-vis the corruption and the strong arm kind of politics, is based in this narco culture and its right-wing opposition.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Back in the 1970s, the United Kingdom tried an experiment and they legalized heroin. And so heroin addicts could literally go to their doctor, get a prescription, go to a center, a shoot-up center basically, and or just take their heroin home and shoot it up whenever they wanted. And my recollection of the number one thing that they found two interesting things. Number one was that on an average, my recollection is it was 5 years. Over a certain period of years, people would eventually just spontaneously stop using drugs.
And a lot of those people were maintaining jobs, doing...
Oh, it was literally, it was doctors and lawyers as well as, street sweepers and things. But the other thing that seemed to be the major correlation with stopping drugs was having a meaningful job.
Well, and in Portugal recently, they decriminalized all drugs,
yes,
and they found a remarkable drop in the addiction. I mean, the number of people that are addicted and the amount of usage. And in the Netherlands, when they, like in Amsterdam, when they allowed the hash bars and that kind of stuff, they found that high school kids. The number of high school kids experimenting with cannabis went down.
Oh, the same thing in the United States, in states that have legalized recreational pot.
Well, I live in one of those states, and we've also found a reduction in a number of other areas of crime and criminal behavior. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just the Partnership for a Free Drug America, just realize the nature of the problem is the prohibition.
Yes.
And that if you took away the money that's made by the narco states, then you'd really put a dent in some of the problems that are affecting Central and South America. Plus, we could release people from 2/3 of our prisons and turn the prisons into rehab centers.
Yep. Yeah. Or just plow them, tear them down and turn them into farmland. Richard, thank you for the call. I'm spot on. I'm with you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's your media support group for We the People. Yeah, that document still is there. We'll see if the court is going to stand up to Trump or not. And welcome back. Claire in Fort Worth, Texas, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Claire, what's on your mind today?
Precincts, organization. The guy from North Carolina who called, I sympathize. Texas, which is where I am, was in that same spot 10 years ago.
Now, you're talking about the situation where not enough people are volunteering with the local Democratic Party to actually populate it, and so they become moribund. They basically don't work.
Basically, Texas Democrats were depressed. No one would run for office because they didn't think they'd win. Therefore, we didn't have anybody to vote for.
Right.
So what happens comes from the top down to the bottom up, and it kind of meets in the middle. The county party has to get the precinct chairs to get out and do something. For the last 4 years, we've been doing really well at recruiting them because we're starting to get candidates. And the state party is out there recruiting those candidates. For the first time in forever, we had a primary in every single county on the Democratic side, which has not happened since Ann Richards was governor.
Wow. That's wonderful news.
Yeah. And the reddest metropolitan county in Texas, Beto O'Rourke carried by a ton. And the city of Fort Worth is hardcore blue now, and it's just, but we had to start at the bottom. And one of the things we did this year was organize the precinct chair recruitment by the state house districts.
Mm-hmm.
So they get a chair, and then that chair would go out, and when the existing precinct chairs reported back on the interested people that they got, eager Democrats that had been hiding in the basement and such, then he would call on them and recruit them to be precinct chairs. And it increased our precinct chair percentages from 40% countywide to about 65% countywide.
That's great.
Some of those house districts went up to 80% precincts have chairs. And that increases the activity of our county executive committee. It gives support to our state executive delegates and so forth. And so it's like a big circle from the state party to the county party. And you have to get your county party to help you. Our county put in a training program that is phenomenal for precinct chairs.
Oh, that's great.
So with computer support and all kinds of really great helpful things, I can pull up my precinct, and I know everybody that voted. I know who voted by mail. I can check and see that their ballots got there. It's an amazing thing. I can even find out who didn't vote for mayor 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. But it's happening. Texas may not turn blue in 20, but I think we might do it in 22. We almost did it. We almost got Beto O'Rourke into the Senate. That was less than the population of Arlington, Texas.
And I would say if it wasn't for billionaire money, you would have.
And the border mess that Trump went down there and stirred up, and Ted Cruz. And Ted Cruz told a lot of lies, too.
Yeah.
But, he did about what we want. But, and the Arizona guy, they are on point over there.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And I see this happening all across the country. People are on fire. People are waking up. And organized people, at the end of the day, will beat organized money. We just have to get enough of us going. Claire, thanks so much for your activism, and thanks for sharing a great story. I appreciate it. Just did a rant about how we have actually passed a major climate change tipping point that we can't walk back from. We can't stop it. This is coming now. It is unstoppable. This first step of it, which has to do with, the destruction of major cities in the United States and all around the world. You can check this out over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, or for people who support us on YouTube as well, you can see this. Get over to patreon.com/THOMHARTMANN to check this out. We're talking about how prior to a couple of years ago, and this is how, tipping points, you can only see them in the rearview mirror. Prior to a couple of years ago, in the winter, the Arctic and Greenland, the Antarctic and Greenland, would recover some of their ice. Now they're not even doing that. It's just pausing. The melting is just pausing. That's that tipping point. And the consequences of this are going to be terrible. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back, Tom in Stanford, Kentucky. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today? Tom, watching us on YouTube, you are on the air. I'm not hearing Tom. Sometimes people just have their phone on. Tom's on line 4, sure, if you want to check and find out what's going on. Mark in San Francisco, listening on AM 910. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, it's income inequality. That, to me, that's the big one.
You think that's the biggest crisis we're facing?
The loss of pensions, reverse mortgages, which we never had before, student debt, people living paycheck to paycheck, the loss of union jobs, tax cuts for the rich. It's beyond belief how bad it's gotten, Tom.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and this is the direct predicted consequence of Reaganism. 40 years now of Reaganism, and nobody reversed it. We've had 2 Democratic presidents since Reagan, and neither one of them reversed Reaganism. And it's that if we're going to solve this problem of income inequality, which then echoes out to everything from school failures to drug addiction to divorce to the destruction of the family to just all kinds of things, we need to reverse Reaganism. And number one is we need to reverse these 3 tax cuts: Reagan's tax cut, Bush's tax cut, and Trump's tax cut. Those 3 tax cuts brought us a $21 trillion debt. And there is so much we could do if we could just reverse Reaganism. Mark, spot on. Thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to AM 910 there in San Francisco. Howard in New York City. Hey, Howard, what's up?
Yeah, hi. Danny Savalas, I guess you know him, is a legal commentator. He says that the National Emergency Act, I think it was in '86, doesn't specify or define what a national emergency is.
That's correct.
So does that mean it goes up to the Supreme Court and John Roberts decides whether we're a democracy or a unitarian government?
Yes. In a nutshell. Yeah, I know. And it's not just John Roberts. It's Clarence Thomas, and it's Brett Kavanaugh, and it's Sam Alito, and who's the other right-wing crazy? Anyhow, yeah, it's that's what's going to happen, Howard. And Trump laid it out. He was absolutely right. And of course, on Saturday Night Live, Alec Baldwin did a perfect imitation, but it was spot on. We'll see where it goes. Howard, thanks for the call. Tom in Stanford, Kentucky. You want to try it again, Tom?
Yeah. Hi, Tom.
We just got about 15 seconds here, so quick, please.
Okay. Quickly. Given that over 2 years the Republicans and the Democrats have vetoed or not voted for this wall,
right.
That's the question. Why is he motivated to build a wall? And this greedy, selfish man has property or investments in Panama, which is a money laundering operation for the drug dealers.
Yeah, well, it may well be that. It may be that he's got big donors who are in the construction business, or it may simply be that he's decided to run for re-election in 2020, and he's kicking it off right now with his racist trope, and he's trying to activate the white racist base, which is unfortunately substantial. Tom, thank you for the call. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.